There is a whole world of cinema to be discovered out there. You just have to overcome the 1-inch barrier known as subtitles. This is that 1-inch barrier. I'm Nick here with Josh, Kieran, as always. Gentlemen, how are we?
Very good.
I mean, I've been better. Like most of the state of Queensland, we are in mourning.
This is a tough day for us to record. We are, definitely in a mourning period at the moment as sports fans, as AFL, NRL fans, respectively. It's not been a good couple of days, that's for sure.
Both Brisbane teams in their respective codes making their first grand final appearances in 20 years. Or for the Lions, 20 years. For the Broncos, going for their first premiership in 20 years.
Yeah.
And both of them losing in heartbreaking fashion. So,
very heartbreaking. So,
in keeping with the theme of depressing subject matter,
we've got a doozy of a pick for you today. But if this is your first time joining us on the show, thank you for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, please make sure you subscribe. If you're listening to us on the podcasting platform of your choice, make sure you give us a follow on there. We've got a nice little back catalogue of episodes as well, where we've gone to Canada, Norway, Germany. We've been everywhere. So we're going into new territories today, which is pretty exciting for my pick for this month. So we've gone to Iran this month, which is not a country I've been overly familiar with the filmography of in my time watching films, both international and Hollywood, I guess. But it is a film from 1990 called Close Up. Now, this was pitched to me by a friend of ours, Josh, you know him as well, Kyle, who was we were just talking about sort of international cinema, and he was like, you have to check out this film Close Up. It's from Iran. Don't look it up too much. Just kind of go into it as blind as possible, which is generally how I like to watch films anyway. But I did a little bit of background research, obviously, when we pitched it on the last episode, and I can tell you that even knowing the little amount that I did not prepare me for what I was about to watch. But to give a bit of a background to everyone listening, so Close Up is it's described as a docu-fiction film. So it is inspired by a true story of Hassan Sabzian, a cinephile who impersonated the director Mohsin Makhmalbaf to convince a family they would star in his so-called new film. So it's inspired by a true story in which Sabzian, the lead character, I guess, plays himself. But there is a mixture of real life footage from the trial that he was ultimately not charged. Well, I guess he was charged with fraud, I guess, for impersonating someone, and the family felt endangered because of that. But then there's dramatic recreations of certain events that we will go into as we talk about the movie on this episode. But I don't think I was prepared for how, I'm going to say a good way, conflicted I was about this movie, and I was unaware of the true story behind it as well. But I do want to point out that this movie comes from director Abbas Kiarostami, and we quickly talked about it before the episode started, but I was not familiar with his work and his profile as a director. How about you guys?
Well, I wasn't. No, I mean, I have seen one of his films, but I didn't realise until I watched this and then looked into it. So,
I was familiar with the name. A film that some people recognise is Taste of Cherry, which is arguably his most popular film. Yep. I haven't seen it, but it was something that I was aware of. And looking at his filmography, there was, film titles in there that I was like, I recognise that. I've heard people talking about that. So he's just one of those directors who's always kind of been on the periphery in sort of film circles. And
I guess backtracking a little bit with just Iranian film in general, are you kind of, aware of any filmmakers, or is there any that stick out to you? Or, just coming into this episode, how familiar were you with Iranian cinema?
I mean, obviously Asghar Farhadi.
That would be the biggest one, right? Yeah.
Most people would have at least either heard of or seen one of his films.
And to just rattle some off, we got like A Hero, The Salesman, Separation was probably, that's his most critically acclaimed one, I guess.
Yeah, I think that may have won Best Foreign Language Feature.
I think so, yeah.
Maybe 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So, that was kind of, I guess, my knowledge, but it's not a country you generally associate with movies.
Yeah.
Middle Eastern cinema in general, it's not a place where I guess a lot of us have exposure to.
And I think coming in from a Western perspective as well, we probably recognize a lot of, I guess, Middle Eastern film in general associated with war films, because obviously there's been the considerable amount of conflict between the Middle East and I guess specifically America, but the Western world in general for the last, probably 30, 35 plus years now, that a lot of the cinema that we're inundated with are war films from an American perspective. So it's quite interesting, or at least it was interesting to me coming into it to see a story that was obviously had nothing to do. There's mention of conflict, but it's not really centered around any of the wars or the conflicts. And I think this movie in particular was a very fascinating insight to Iranian culture in general, and there's a lot of the similarities there are, but with the Western world as well, because it's almost shocked me that this movie hasn't actually been adapted into a English language film yet. Not necessarily the docu-fiction genre, but the story itself. Yeah. I'm a sucker for courtroom dramas. It has actually baffled me that this movie that is so critically acclaimed, that's on the Criterion Collection, that is incredibly highly rated on Rotten Tomatoes, Metacritic, IMDb, all of it, hasn't been touched by Hollywood. I think that shocks me the most, considering the business conglomerate that they are. So, but going into it, I think with what you boys knew about the film and going into it in the docu-fiction genre, was there any expectations? Did you have any idea what to expect coming into this? And the reason I'm asking is because there's not actually a lot of story to break down. And it would make it an incredibly quick episode. So I think I'm more interested in discussing the general genre of the film and then the Iranian influence on that as well. But docu-fiction in general, did you know that going into it?
The only thing I looked up, I briefly looked it up when you picked it and just saw that it was a true story.
Yep.
They didn't really use actors. They used actual people from the story, from the event, which is obviously going to be quite interesting in itself.
Oh, God, yeah.
And that's pretty much it. I press play and away you go.
Away you went.
Yeah, no, same boat. I went in really blind, and I think this is easily the most confusing film that we've watched so far on the show. And that's saying something because we watched Delicatessen recently. But they're very confusing for very different reasons.
Very different reasons.
I think, like you said, it's a very simple story. Like nothing really happens as such. I did think, though, after finishing it, you know how people who don't really engage with films on a film level, they just watch movies, and they have this notion in their head of what foreign films are like, and they think it's all like pretentious garbage that people just pretend to like so that they can seem intelligent.
Totally, yeah.
If you watch Close Up, I would forgive you for thinking that.
No, I get that. I totally get that because to me, confusing is a pretty accurate way of explaining it, because you're not, especially with the opening scene, you are not given a lot of context about what is going on. But I really sort of found it a very interesting look into the lives of people who were involved with this event, I guess you could say. And the opening scene is about the journalist who was intrigued by this story and wanted to come cover the story because he was requested by the family who had already been approached by Sabzians, you know what I mean? So there's a lot to break down there. So, but to me, I found this very fly on the wall sort of, a documentary approach to introducing very minute characters was quite interesting to me, because it's a long cold open, I guess. I guess you could call it cold open. It's about 15 minutes long.
Until the title comes
Until
up.
the title does come up. And we kind of get an idea of what's going on. But this is also one of those movies where if you kind of blink and miss a line of dialogue, a lot of context can be thrown out the window. And ultimately what this journalist is doing is he's going with the police to capture the arrest of this man who is being, this family's called on him to be removed from the house after impersonating a filmmaker. But none of the conversation is around that. If you know what I mean, they're talking very casually about sort of, his work as a journalist and how these guys are kind of not police officers, but they are. And then they get to the house and it's sort of the camera's looking from this very far away long lens view of him approaching the house, the journalist approaching the house and whatnot. So this first 15 minutes was I was intrigued, but I can see, to Kieran's point, how someone would be like, what is going on?
Especially when you get about the 60-second long scene of just what is it, like a can of spray paint or a bottle of something
just rolling down the
road. You go, this is going to cut. This is going to cut.
And
it's going to cut, right?
And it's still going. It's like, oh, Jesus.
And then you're like, hang on, something's going to come out where it ends and like,
no. The spray paint bottle will come back in some way. No, it did not. It did not in any way, shape or form.
Was not Chekhov's gun.
But it kind of becomes a bit chaotic as well. Like
Yeah, totally, yeah.
trying to find something to record the audio and
That's and I found a little bit of humor in that as well. It kind of had this bumbling idiot vibe to me, and I don't know. And this is going to be a common theme that comes up throughout the film. I did not know what was real, and I did not know what was a recreation. And there is a lot of pros to that. But when it comes to trying to follow a narrative, there's a lot of cons to that as well. So there's sort of looking for someone to record the audio, him talking to all the different police officers on the scene, and then ultimately being like, oh no, you have to talk to this person. And the captain comes over and he's like, I kind of have no idea what's going on, but we think there's someone in there who's been impersonating someone. And it's the everyone's unawareness or unsureness of what's actually going on that kind of created the intrigue for me. But as well, at the same time, I kind of found I was very interested in the Iranian culture aspect of it as well, in more so in the sense of like, oh, this to me just seems like any small village anywhere. Everyone's sort of coming out and having a look at what's going on. Everyone wants to be a part of the story, and everyone wants to give their sort of 2 cents about, oh yeah, we know who Zabzian is and sort of what he's like. You know what I mean? Like everyone wants to be part of this. Yes. Almost like massive. This is the biggest thing to happen in this small village.
Well, that's
like
what the journalist
community hub
says on the ride over in the taxis. You know, he's talking about all these other famous journalists around the world, and he's saying this could be, the story that puts me on the map, kind of thing, of this guy impersonating
another police
officer
just shitting on all the other journalists. He starts rattling off journalists' names. He's like, oh yeah, they're bad. Like they're not a good journalist, and it's funny because you kind of think that. With how I'm sure anyone views media, even back in the 90s, it's kind of like you have your biases based on what people are reporting. Whereas this guy is like kind of fresh and new into it, who weirdly, I feel like he's a reflection of the director, I guess, coming in to this movie. You know what I mean? Like
I also feel like it's kind of a sort of chat about lower class as well. Like
totally.
Obviously, he's a journalist.
Yep.
He doesn't have equipment to record. Like he obviously has no money.
Yes.
He's getting a lift out by the police. Like
yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's there's some interesting commentary thrown around here as well, and because I think as well when it comes to Sabzian as a person, as we learn throughout the film, his obsession with cinema, his obsession with this director that he impersonates comes from the fact that he did not have a lot growing up, but film. Yeah. His obsession with film came through a necessity to escape reality. And I found that quite interesting in the sense of, even in the different sort of class levels is that, I grew up reasonably, all right, like not well off, but, not high class or anything, but in a completely different socioeconomic situation, in a completely different cultural situation, there was still that same impact of cinema on this guy. And it really, for better or worse, and some would argue worse because of sort of his rambling sort of nature. And obviously there's you can tell that there's just a lack of care for him as a person growing up through whether it's an educational system, societal systems or whatever, that no one sort of nurtured or anything for him because he was just so hell-bent obsessed with almost like playing his life out like a movie. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's parts of the trial where he seems really excited by the cameras. He has no hesitation about his whole trial getting filmed because to him, it's living this reality of that he wants to foster. So
yeah, I think it's important to clarify as well that he's not doing this out of some sort of there's no sinisterness to it.
It's not malicious or anything.
No, he's not trying to get anything out of it, even though he does borrow money from one of the family members.
Yes.
And then doesn't pay them back, which is why they sort of take him.
That's
to
why
court.
they get angry. Yeah.
His motives are always just so. It's like, I just wanted to be this guy. I just wanted to feel important. So I think that makes it really interesting because I think you could watch a film like this and it could play out in sort of like a real sort of psychological, thrillery sort of way where he's trying to get something out of them or do something to them. But he's just a guy who just managed to convince some people that he was somebody else.
Yeah.
And live out that fantasy, which is what it is.
I think it's also important that the reason he's attracted to that director's films is because it's a commentary on his life. It's about the lower class. So and I guess that's the beauty of cinema is no matter who you are, no matter where you've come from, there's always going to be movies for you that you resonate with and
relate to. And he just happened to fall down the rabbit hole of completely indoctrinating himself with it, which makes it interesting to me that there definitely feels like there's two different viewpoints of this film. And I think the story that's being told paints this guy as a bit crazy, but I think Kiarostami paints him in a very compassionate light.
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of skipping forward a little bit, but the biggest thing that shows that is so the director he's impersonating, right, is Mohsen Makhmalbaf, who is a director, a real-life Iranian director himself, right? Where he gets to meet him at the end. So, I mean, just sort of say a mild spoiler, but Sabzian has to serve a certain amount of time in prison for what he's done. And when he comes out, he gets to meet the filmmaker face to face, which, of course, the movie that was getting filmed, right, is a dramatic recreation of, what happened. Obviously, that didn't happen when he left prison initially, but they've created this scene. But there's also this authenticity to it that this man is actually meeting his real life idol, even though it's a recreated movie scene. And there's a fun bit of trivia from that in the sense that they have this audio, the cameras are set up really far away. You can hear the journalist talking about how the microphones are going to keep cutting in and out because they're so far away, which actually isn't true. They have the full audio from the meeting between Sabzian and Makhmalbaf in this for the film. But they had to keep cutting it because Sabzian was so infatuated and kept telling this director how much he loves him and how much his work's inspired him, even though the script said was completely different. And you have one guy going off the chain being like, this is the once in a lifetime moment I'll get, to another guy who's like, I've been given lines from a guy who's written a script and I need to perform these lines. And to me, it's very interesting because I think leaving that in the film and playing it out that way is told through a very compassionate, sympathetic lens. Whereas I think the story itself and the narrative that plays out almost feels, it's not sinister like you said, but there's issues there and there's problems with how that's sort of come through. And I just sort of, I was very intrigued by I wouldn't call it mixed messaging, but the chaotic nature of this story.
It really does blur the line between fact and fiction. Not just in terms of what's real, like what really happened and what was made up for the film. I mean purely from a perspective of what are they filming in real time?
Oh God, yeah.
And what was staged, a staged recreation of real events.
It's so
Because
unnerving.
even the trial, I can't seem to find a definitive answer on whether that was the real trial that they filmed or if it was a recreation, because some people say that it was the real trial.
Yeah.
Some people say it was basically a verbatim mock-up.
How
crazy is that?
Yeah, I read that it was, and I think a lot of it's on the Criterion extras.
Yeah,
but that it was the real trial. He spoke to the judge. The judge delayed the trial so that
For the
filming, because he was right into film.
This is mental.
He was right into film. He loved the director, so he delayed the trial. I think the thing where it gets blurred with the trial is, I think there was quite a lot of the director asking questions during the trial, which then makes the trial
not a real trial.
Not a real trial.
Well, that's it. Because throughout the film, we do actually hear from, and not really see so much, but we hear from Abbas Kiarostami, who is the director of Close Up, the film that we're talking about.
Yes,
I can understand if you're getting confused.
No, trust me, because
we've watched it and we're confused.
We were trying to get through it.
So Kiarostami, who directed the film, actually does feature in the film. You know, you can hear him asking questions to the judge and to Sabzian, both when he visits him in jail and during the trial. Mm-hmm. It's like nothing else I've ever watched.
It really is.
I don't think you could get away with this, for a wider audience. I don't think it would be as accepted if it was, an American film.
Yep.
It's just so bizarre. And it makes, while it isn't necessarily the most interesting story, I think the intrigue comes from what am I actually watching?
Yes.
Not what am I watching from a narrative perspective, but from a technical filmmaking perspective, what is this movie?
And from a very human perspective as well, because this ultimately plays with someone's life for a little bit as well. Someone who already, as we kind of briefly touched on, has had an inability to not distinguish reality from cinema at points in his life, to the point where, so I guess for a little bit of context, how he gets involved with his family is that, and this is the way the movie recreates it, whether it's completely factual or not is probably up for debate, but he's on a bus, he's reading a book that Makhmalbaf has written about cinema. There's a lady sitting next to him on the bus. She talks about how her family love that director. They love that sort of cinema. He offers to give the book. And then they're like, oh, no, you keep the book. And then he kind of starts being like, well, it's my book. I'm Makhmalbaf. I'm the director. Yeah. And they get so excited. And he's like, I'm actually looking for a house and a family to film my next movie. And I'd love to check yours out. So he basically involves himself. And we don't get any recreations of what the time was like with the family, which I think's a very... Considering, look, I mean, it's probably a lot too many puppets to play with in that regard. It's probably easier, and I'll say it in this way, easier to control one person in Sabzian than it is to control a whole family. I also think it makes the ending of the film a lot more emotionally impactful that we didn't see any sort of connection with the family outside of the lady we saw on the bus. But he assimilates, he inserts himself into this family's life for about... Was it 40 days? It was 40 days since he saw them.
It was literally like...
It was months.
It was like a week or two,
was it?
I think. Yeah, he wasn't there...
For long.
For long.
But that's where, as soon as he asked for the money and didn't pay back is when they were like, oh, this man's pretended to be a director.
I mean, pretty much from them meeting him to him sort of getting released after the trial, that's about 40 days.
That's right. That's where it came. That's right.
Yeah, he's only with the family for about a week and a half.
Which is crazy, isn't it? So, and it's kind of, to me... creates a bit more of an interesting, intriguing, and somewhat unsettling, I guess, sort of look at like how much art can control life as well, or how far an artist like Kiarostami is willing to go for art by manipulating someone's life.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy to me. Like, there's a moral ambiguity there of like, sure, this is a pretty low scale crime, and it's not, it'd be completely different if this guy was up for some sort of like death penalty crime and then you're trying to capture it away. But it's almost like Kiarostami saw that no matter what the outcome of the trial is, it's not going to be so detrimental on this guy's life. But then who is he to decide that, this is how am I going to influence this? The fact that he's asking questions in the trial
and gets it delayed and all sorts.
Is a commentary on him as an artist, but also a commentary on the judicial system of Iran in the 90s.
Yes.
Like, you know what I mean?
For
so
sure.
it's
a bit fast and loose with the rules.
But as confusing as this movie actually is, it does raise a lot more questions that I didn't have, previously, preceding the film. So it's quite interesting. Yeah.
I think the craziest thing about this is like everyone plays themselves. I mean, literally everyone. So Sabzian, who impersonates the director, is played by himself. Makhmalbaf, who is the director being impersonated, plays himself. Kiarostami, who is the director of Close Up, is in the film as himself. Yeah. The family, whose lives he inserts himself into, are all there playing themselves.
It's crazy.
The cab driver who drives him to the house, who drives the journalist to the house, is the real cab driver. There is no actors in this as far as I can tell.
No, I imagine being that family and like, well, that's all happened and then another director comes and goes, so what we're going to do?
Fool me once, shame on you.
Wait a second.
I've heard this story before.
But we'll do it.
Yeah.
We'll give it a go.
It reminds me of my favorite George Bush quote is like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, you ain't ever going to fool me again. But they did not get fooled this second time because it was the real Abbas Kiarostami.
I think one of the really interesting parts of, I guess, the way the family in particular are portrayed is that the father of the family is very keen to assert that he was never fooled by Sabzian.
Yes, it's a big pride thing, right?
He repeatedly sort of says, "Oh, I always knew that he was a fake and a phony. I just wanted to sort of see where he was going with it." And it's like, did you though?
Yeah,
did you? Don't think you did.
Big
but it's just funny how he's, I guess, in his own way, in the same way that Sabzian has and Kiarostami has, the father has manipulated this story in his own way. Everyone in this story is got their own version of events and
they all want their time on screen to tell their story. That's the funny thing is like, it's their 15 minutes of fame ultimately to get their story across, which it just brings up another theme of the film in that sort of regard. Was he under the impression that it was going to be a national, international acclaimed film, so I need to show people that, I'm not the fool that gave this amount of money to this guy. Like, how much saving face is happening as well.
That's right. I think that was my biggest, sort of thoughts with it, because I became really sympathetic to his plight.
To Sabzians.
Yeah. I mean, especially when he's,
so funny to say
he's explaining where he's come from and why he's done it, and that he wasn't trying, and he'd never come from a place of power, and then he had this power of a director where he could just tell people what to do, and
funny.
It overgrows him, and I became really sympathetic with him, and he's got especially in those scenes, really sympathetic face.
Oh God, yeah,
like
absolutely,
he's timid and.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I think the biggest thing you can say about this film is the one person who is pretending to be someone else is the most genuine person in the whole thing, right? Like that's no one else had anything to gain from being a part of this documentary and trying to tell their story, except for completely selfish reasons. And the only person who actually genuinely just wanted to be in it because he loved movies was the guy who's on trial for not being himself. Like, it's great. This movie
they
is
say that in the trial.
Yeah, that's right.
One of the sons says, I don't believe that he's genuinely sorry, because even now I feel like he's playing a character.
Right? Yeah.
He's saying he's himself.
But then are we getting fooled? Is that, you know what I mean? Are we getting fucked with in that regard? It's just this movie is...
Do you think Inception's confusing? You ain't seen shit. I do feel like this is just the high art version of a 60-minute special.
Yeah, there's a little bit of totally.
Like, I'm expecting Tracy Grimshaw to come out at some point. Have you been fooled by a fake director? Contact a current affair.
After the break, tick tock, tick tock, tick tock.
Dodgy tradies and fake directors. Our Australian audience is going to love that. Everyone else is going to have no idea.
The International Cinema Podcast with the niche Australian jokes. I don't have much else to say. I think we've covered a fair bit about the movie itself and the more questions it raises than answers, especially in a moral sort of sense. But when it comes down to sort of, I guess, the reason for the podcast is that this, at the end of the day, is a film from Iran. It's an Iranian film. And based on what we were talking about earlier about what we've seen in Middle Eastern cinema, this is quite unlike anything I've seen in Middle Eastern cinema or Hollywood. So do you feel like this is or not necessarily do you feel like this is a decent representation of Iranian cinema, but do you kind of feel as well that there is, I'm trying to figure out a way to word this, more so in the sense of like, it not necessarily reflects how Iranian cinema is, but I don't know, because I think this is more of a Kiarostami film than an Iranian film. You know what I mean?
You wouldn't use this film as an example of foreign cinema, international cinema, whatever you want to call it, or Iran as a country.
It kind of stands on its own merit. Right?
Because it's so unlike anything else that's been made anywhere, Iran or otherwise.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can look at it as an Iranian film. I think, like you said, you have to look at it as an Abbas Kiarostami film. Maybe if you watched his other films and sort of compared it to that stylistically and tonally and things like that, it would make more sense.
I'm interested to see what you think about it, because I don't know how much of it you recall, but you said you've seen certified copy.
Yeah.
What's that about? What's the
that is about so Juliette Binoche is in it. She goes to like now I haven't seen this for about 10 years or so. No. She goes to like a book signing thing for this author. They end up getting on quite well, going away together, and then they get someone thinks that they're married,
right?
And they decide to go with it and sort of
that's pretty much how it runs down here, which is funny as well because it's set in Tuscany.
Yeah, and I remember a lot of it being in English.
Yeah, right. Languages of French, English, and Italian as well.
Yeah, because they obviously have to speak English.
That's so funny as well, considering,
it's so different.
It's super different to anything.
And it's in no way, shape or form like a documentary kind of. Right.
And I mean, just looking at Kiarostami's IMDb, he had a 48 film career as a director, which, he passed away in 2016. It says here, but he was just scrolling down real quick. So, he did a lot of short films. 1970, he sort of started, and his first feature film was 1976. And just looking at titles here, it just seems like a completely a smorgasbord of different styles of drama, whether it's a lot of romance. It looks like, you know, that's just from a, you know, just a first glance. So it's quite interesting that this is a story that obviously was big enough in the country of Iran that he was like, I want to.
It must have been pretty big, and it must have for some reason resonated with him, because I also read that he was pretty much starting a new film,
right?
And he'd heard this story and put that fully on pause.
That's crazy,
and then started this.
Absolutely insane. So, quickly talking about the critical reception of it. Obviously, it opened in Iran because everyone knew about the story itself, to quite negative reviews apparently.
Yeah, okay.
Apparently it was just not well received. But then
which I can understand, because it paints someone who at the end of the day committed a crime in a sympathetic light.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's generally not going to go down with a majority of people,
quite
I feel.
well. Considering I think it's safe to assume that considering the scale of the story that was, or the scale of the outcome of the story was quite negative in general as well. Like, you know, I think the fact there's probably people who did not like the idea that this trial was being used for a film. You know what I mean? Like in a country that probably has already had issues questioning their government, and that's probably a lot of places in the world too. But, you know, one that's been as highly televised as Iran over the last 30 years, you can understand why people living in that country would be like, our government's fucked and they're going ahead and just doing this. They're doing shit like this. Yeah. So it makes sense. But then obviously the movie opened up overseas, and you got like New York Times calling it brilliant, Los Angeles calling it a window into the psyche of a complicated man and the social cultural reality of Iran. So like everyone is seeing this as this much deeper, more profound picture, which I assume is probably more so the intent of Kiarostami. You know, painting a reflection of his country's culture, but also holding the brush, you know, while he's painting it as well, which then calls into, you know, what sort of biases does he have, whether they're political, social, cultural or not. Yeah. You know, you can't really say that this is a film that's reflective of Iran when a man had so much control of it. And again, I think it just brings up the moral ambiguity argument of it all. I don't think Kiarostami is a bad person, like just from watching this film, but it makes you wonder, you know, is he just like Subzian? Is he unable to distinguish the reality and the fiction, the cinema and real life? Like it's quite...
Yeah.
I think I'm going to be thinking about this movie for a long time, but not necessarily because of the film, just to be like, is it okay to have this in the first place? You know what I mean?
It's very much a film made for film people.
Yes. Oh, God.
So it's no wonder that it's, you know, looking through sort of the critical reception. In 2012, it ranked number 43 in the BFI, which is the British Film Institute's critics poll of the 50 best films ever made.
So,
It ranked in the top 50 for the Sight and Sound critics poll, which is sort of one of the most... You know,
it's like prestigious.
Yeah, the most esteemed lists of best films. Sight and Sound is up there, and it ranked in there. So I can see why film critics love it, because at the end of the day, they're people who love films like Sabzian and like Kiarostami.
Yep.
And it's a film made for them.
Totally.
Is it a film made for general audiences? I don't know. I think it comes back to what I said earlier, and I said it half jokingly, but there's some truth to it, that I can understand if someone who wasn't a big film person watched this and went, what a load of pretentious wank.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
You know, who cares? It's just some dude who pretended to be a director. Why are we talking about the meaning of life? Like, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I can totally understand that perspective.
Yeah.
Even as a film person myself.
Yeah.
So, but like you said, I'll be thinking about it not because of the content, but because of the how and the why rather than the what.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Absolutely. Is there anything else we'd like to add? It's a shorter episode than normal, but like I said, it's more normal, short film. I mean, look, comparatively, 90 minutes to 3 hours and 40, but
balance it out.
Who's counting?
You all are welcome for that.
But yeah, I just, if there's anything else you guys want to add before I try and elevator pitch this thing, but
no, I mean, what Kieran said, it's it's amazing how when I looked at critically and even scores on IMDb, it's high.
Super high.
And
real high.
Yeah, it's a film. I feel like films that commentate on film directors and they always seem to get a fair bit more.
Totally.
Bit
That's
more
why
love and
everyone loved The
praise.
Fablemans.
Yeah.
No hate to anyone who liked The Fablemans. I
yeah.
just didn't like it as much as you.
Yeah. But they're quite a winning formula for the film people out there.
Totally.
I mean, you only have to look at The Artist winning Best Picture.
Yeah,
2010,
years
right?
ago.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hollywood and film critics love films about films.
Yeah.
Except if it's Babylon, in which case it gets shits on.
Which what the fuck?
why?
Dude?
Yeah,
Babylon's
why as well?
sick. Babylon's
that's
so
right.
good.
I agree.
It's sick in
The rest
two
of,
ways.
the rest of this episode is just a rant about how the critics are wrong about
You're
Babylon.
all wrong. You're all you critics out there were wrong about Babylon. It is great, and I haven't watched it again, so I don't know if it holds up. But I'm hoping it does. Well, look, to try and elevate a pitch close up, I agree with the sentiment that I don't think this should be a first venture into international cinema, because of exactly what Kieran said. It absolutely reinforces every stereotype about what people usually think about subtitled films, is that the only ones that really get made are pretentious wank. But I think if you are looking for a movie that is going to spark your interest in a moral way of how much art can either not just imitate life, but how much art can affect life, I think it's actually quite an interesting breakdown of that. The movie's not going to come to any conclusions for you, but I think that's part of the power of the film as well, and it gives you power as the audience member to sort of sit back and make your own judgments about it. It's a confusing watch, but I think that just adds to the intrigue. I think I was very attentive to this film because of that, more so than usual, which says a lot about my attention span, but that's why I like 90-minute movies. So I definitely think this is one of those movies where if you put in the work it's trying to give you from a viewing experience, I think there is going to be reward at the end, and that may not come for a couple of weeks for us. Even just talking about it for the last 40 minutes, I'm like, I've got a bit better of a hold and understanding of it, and I do feel like that the viewing experience will reap the reward of the conclusion I come up to with how I feel about this film morally. In the sense of it being a cultural reflection of Iran, yes and no, but like I said earlier, it's someone's biased interpretation of how they feel about their home country rather than an accurate representation, definitely based on, like I said, I haven't seen a lot of Iranian films, but I can imagine there's probably a lot more that paint them in a better light. Even Asghar Farhadi's films that, are pretty dramatic, intense pictures do have somewhat of a semblance of hope in them as well. I also think the last 5 or couple of minutes of this film are fantastic. I think they're brilliant, and I think they're very well worth the ride. So not the strongest of elevator pitches we've had on the show, but I think
it's a long elevator.
Yeah. I was going up to the penthouse, baby. I was going up to the penthouse. I think there's no way to shortly describe this film.
No, I'm not joking when I say that it's easily the most confusing film we've watched for the podcast.
Totally.
And I would probably say it's one of the most confusing films I've watched. Period.
And I know you're not saying that in a negative way either as well. Like I think it's not one of those movies where you sit back and go, what the fuck was that? It's kind of made me go like, what the fuck was that? Like, you know what I mean? Like it's a tonal
the
thing.
Story is not the confusing part.
No.
It is all these metatextual elements of what is real, what isn't, blurring the lines between fact and fiction. Because it's a narrative film crossed with a documentary.
It's so crazy.
Crossed with, like a journalism article, in a magazine or a newspaper or an interview. And it's...
One thing I should have asked before the elevator pitch, does this make you want to watch more of Kiarostami's films?
I've seen 2. I would definitely, I would. Yep.
Yeah,
I'd
I
like
think...
to see what else he does.
I would be interested to see how he goes with sort of a standard narrative feature.
I think that's why I'm more intrigued by it. And then actually his film in general, I'm like, okay, if you can make some thought-provoking shit with a more straightforward narrative, then I'm intrigued. So.
Yeah.
So, ratings?
I went 3.5. I think... I generally think that could go up in time. But yeah, just where I'm sitting at right now, I watched it the day before we recorded, so I haven't had a long time to sit with it. But yeah, I'm a 3.5 at the moment.
Yep, I watched this a 3-4 weeks ago, and it was fun. When I got up off the couch, I'm like 3 stars probably.
Yeah.
And then you go away and you think about, and I think I remember saying to you about a week later, I was like, I've definitely been thinking about that movie.
Yeah.
So I think I would go. Yeah, I'll go 3.5. I will go 3.5.
I don't know about you guys, but we always tend to go up, I feel, the longer a film sits with us. I can't think of many times where I've watched a film and then it's gone.
There's only one
down.
film we've covered where I think it might go down. What film's that? Barking Dogs Never Bite.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. No,
That's the only. But
I probably
you say
even-
that like that's one out of the. Well, this is our 9th episode, I believe. So like,
Yeah.
It is interesting you saying that, because I also, this talk helps.
Yeah,
like it's kind of hard once you put
you
all
guys
that out
make
there
me
and
smarter, and I appreciate it.
you start to think, I'll raise that 0.5 star.
I mean, when you get, like
I'm pretty
3 cups that are barely full and you pour them into one, you end up with a mostly full drink.
I love it.
I went with 3.5 as well. I think if I was rating it purely on my enjoyment, it's probably like a 2.5. Like I didn't really find much to enjoy in this film.
No, God, no.
I had to pause it a few times because I'm bored.
Yeah.
Like
Oh God,
It's
yeah.
a
there is
slow
not
burn.
there is not a lot happening.
Requires your
Yeah.
attention too. That's the thing. Like it's not one you can sort of go in and out of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because it's all dialogue.
Yeah.
It's
all
there
dialogue,
is basically nothing happening on screen. It's just a lot of conversations.
Yeah.
So it's a tough watch for that. And I think, from enjoyment perspective, not up there. I don't know if I'd be in any rush to rewatch it. But if I was purely going from a, how impressive is this from a technical filmmaking perspective and how much did this make me think about stuff and feel stuff, then it's probably, a 4 or a 4.5.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So I think 3.5 kind of
It's a good
is a
middle
nice middle
ground,
ground. But as you said, it is critically acclaimed. I mean, you go on Letterboxd, which we all use, and that's, I think, in sort of the low 4s, maybe a 4.3 or
Probably.
4.4 or something like that.
So, I think you're absolutely right on that. I'll get a quick
I
live read on that.
actually think that it would be a really interesting rewatch.
I think so too.
Now
With
that
more
we've talked
context.
about it,
Yeah.
with more context, thinking about it, and then going back.
4.4 on a
that's
Letterboxd.
high.
That's
Very
high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Yeah, that
I
would be.
absolutely
I hadn't, as I finished it, I didn't think I would rewatch, but now I think it would actually be really interesting.
It'd be just to sort of take what we
It's
all
in the
said.
1001 movies you must see before you die book as well. Like,
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't surprise me. Yeah, like it's, I can understand.
yeah, because it's so
The appeal.
it's so unique.
Yeah, it is like nothing I've seen. It's just really out there and weird, but not in a, weird content way. It's just not, there's no film
But
like
there's
it.
nothing like it. That's the thing.
No.
And I was
Yeah,
trying
yeah.
to think the other. Sorry, I was gonna say the other day. I watched it yesterday, last night. After the depressing Broncos defeat, which we've come full circle.
Historic shitting the bed.
Oh my god. Different podcast. I was thinking last night. I was like, "There's a documentary I watched a few years ago called The Imposter."
Oh,
you-
awesome. Yeah. so good.
Fantastic documentary.
Yeah,
Have you seen? Ultimately, it's just about there's a family who have a missing child. A couple of years later, someone rocks up on their door, kind of looks like their child, says that he's the child.
Like
and
it's like a fair while later. It's like 15 years later.
Yeah, it's a long time later.
Yeah.
And claims to be the child, and the family sort of take him in. But they get the guy to talk about the experience, like it's a
Right.
one-on-one camera thing.
And they get him to recreate stuff.
And they get him to recreate
But
it.
it's all done in like
Very cinematic. It's
Yeah.
not this fly-on-the-wall
No.
documentary style. It's a genuine
It
recreation.
was the first doco I'd seen that they'd done that.
So that's exactly why I thought that, because I was like, I can't think of another documentary. But the thing is, that's a documentary.
That is a documentary.
Now we see every fucking true crime Netflix doco has recreations in them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I haven't seen anything like The Imposter before. And now it's kind of funny to be like, oh, well, now I've seen Close Up, and now I've seen nothing like that as well.
Yeah,
And The Imposter is the closest comparison.
Yep.
Which I think it's American film, so it's wrong podcast to plug it on. No, but I think it's
great
definitely,
doco.
it's absolutely worth checking out because it's a very sort of that similar sort of documentary with recreation style, but obviously has now.
He's gone on, hasn't he gone on to make like cinematic film, drama film?
The guy who did The Imposter.
Yeah.
Yes, he did. Yeah. I can't remember.
yeah.
He did something. I think he might have done the Julian Assange movie with Benedict Cumberbatch.
Oh,
I think,
yeah.
maybe.
Oh, Fifth Estate.
Yeah, I think so. I believe so. I could be wrong about that.
It's I think what really sets it apart to break it down is the fact that there are scenes that you obviously know are stage recreations, that there's no reason that the camera would have been there.
Yeah.
But there are scenes that make you genuinely question, am I watching this event unfolding in real time for the first time, or am I watching a recreation? It's not just the trial. I think the scenes at the end.
Yes.
It's hard to know whether that's staged or real.
Totally.
Yeah.
The visit by Kiarostami to Sabzian when he's in jail.
Yep.
I couldn't tell. Is that real?
Yeah, yeah.
Is it a
Crazy, isn't it,
recreation
hey?
of a real event? So I think that's what really sets it apart for me.
Totally. But we would love for you guys to watch it if you are interested and form your opinion. Obviously, let us know. You can comment on the YouTube video. You can find our letterbox or our Instagrams if you want to DM us about it. And yeah, that was Close Up from Iran, 1990. So another country ticked off the list, which is quite fun. So next episode of that 1 Inch Barrier, we actually have a special bonus episode coming up for you that we will, you'll see it drop in your podcast feeds. We won't reveal too much about it now, but it may be an ongoing, not spin-off, but an ongoing segmented episode as part of that 1 Inch Barrier. But in keeping form with the picks, it is now back to Josh Barry for our, what are we going to be in? November. Our November pick for that 1 Inch Barrier.
Okay. I'm going back somewhere we've been.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going back to Mexico.
Ooh. Well, we had fun there.
We had fun in Mexico.
We had a good time.
We had a little.
También.
What was that? The 6 Inch Barrier?
Depends who you speak to. But
It depends if you've been in the pool or not.
It's really cold at the moment. It's summer, but it's cold.
and we're actually another Gael Garcia Bernal.
Ah, very nice. Okay.
So, Amores Perros.
Ah.
Thought it might be.
I was toiling with a few different ones, but
Okay.
it's a bit of an epic. It's a 2.5 hour.
Thank you. Appreciate
So,
that.
I mean, that's a short film in 2023.
yeah, we won't go as long as that. What
right.
year? 2000. So we're kind of going back to that early 2000s.
Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu.
Yes.
Ah, okay. So our first Inarritu film as well.
So most people would know from Birdman.
Birdman.
And The Revenant.
Yeah. Beautiful.
What else? What was the one you did last year?
Bardo.
Still haven't watched
Did
that
anyone
actually.
know?
No, I need to set aside another 3 hours because
Might pop up on the show then.
Yeah.
Just do it for the show. Save it for a couple of episodes.
this is
Yeah,
now the
wow.
Mexican podcast.
So have you seen it before?
No.
Amos Perros?
In all honesty, yeah, I think I'm saying it wrong. Amores Perros.
Yeah, that's all right. We'll find out when we watch it.
I mean,
It means-
Pedos is dogs, right?
Yeah,
In
it
Spanish,
means-
harking back to my
Yeah,
high
very
school
nice.
level
I think
knowledge of
it-
Spanish.
I think it means life's a bitch.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
And it's a
like that a
bit of
lot.
a play on words with dogs and
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So you haven't seen it?
I haven't seen it.
You
no.
have seen it, but
I saw it, and probably back around then, early 2000s.
and I haven't seen it. So this will be fun. So
Yeah, so this
All
is
right.
another one I want you guys to see.
So back to Mexico for the November episode. Exciting. Well,
Another one that Josh watched when we were still running around
that's true.
in
Yeah,
diapers.
I'm pretty sure. 2000. How old was I in 2000? Well, we'll find out on the next episode.
Josh is going to go and buy us some cigarettes after this.
Yeah. Like, fucking these young kids. Oh, man. But thank you all for watching and listening to this episode. We do appreciate it. All of our social medias and our letterbox are in the description. You'll find us there. Please subscribe to us on whatever platform you're listening or watching us on. And we'll see you on the next episode of That 1 Inch Barrier.
Thank you.